Hello, everyone. My presentation will be about a project we did in the last few years that is aimed to support public participation by crystallizing local knowledge. This work is motivated by the fact that democracy has been declining because of the quality of the opinion that we can elicit from the public. Okay, as we know that deliberate democracy has been the popular theory, and that basically says the best, the most meaningful participation is through analytic and deliberative, reason-given kind of process, where all these facts and the reason for different kind of attitudes become obvious to the public, and the opinion tend to be meshed. Okay, so. But the problem is that existing methods of deliberate democracy or deliberate participation has quite a limited number of participants that can support. Okay, for example, citizens' jury and consensus conference and citizen assembly. All these methods has been used as a kind of substitute of direct kind of participation. Okay, but it's used a small number of people, we call the mini public, to represent the broader public interest. Okay, but the problem is that whether they are representative and how do you choose the participants to meet that representation requirement is very difficult. Okay, so with the rise of the online deliberation technology, we know that the participation of deliberation can be scaled to a larger extent. However, the quality of the deliberation still doesn't produce the kind of outcome of opinion that decision maker can use. Okay, one of the potential that people see is that deliberate opinion poll has been used in online deliberation for public opinion elicitation, and it has a potential to be scaled to a larger community. All these methods, as we see, have difficulties because they tend to incur a large amount of time commitment, and they are very complicated. Okay? And they're supposed to be dealing with community issues or public policy issues, but when the issue becomes so difficult or so complicated, and they fail to communicate that knowledge. Okay? And if you dig further into this kind of methods, you're going to see that majority of those kind of public participation process are devoted to decision analysis. Okay, and when everything is put together in a nice way, the process of forming opinion wouldn't be too difficult. Okay, so what we try to argue in this this paper is that there's a information barrier that tend to play a role in kind of deterring the meaningful participation in policy making. So there's many reasons that could happen. Mainly is that as one side, the issues are complicated. On the other side, people have very limited efforts to devote their energy into this process. Okay, so we know that in many cases people cannot get enough time, cannot find enough time to participate. Okay? So to reduce that kind of complexity of participation, what we're trying to develop is a method that can address that. Okay, so just give you an example of what we find out from field study in our state college community. A few years ago, there was Penn State pipeline projects. I was trying to run a gas pipeline through a community, which created a lot of emotional and the community's kind of opinion, preference not to lay the pipeline through the community, okay, because of the safety concerns, okay. Well, the community has very vague idea on how the pipeline will affect their safe community. Although there's a lot of reports, there's a lot of opinions that are reported on the media, okay, but exactly that details of knowledge is very difficult to figure out, okay. So people have to go through a lot of media expressions, okay, in all different kind of formats, including this kind of personal expression on social media. So the amount of document people have to process is huge, okay, and take days and days. Even that, there's no reliable or comprehensive ways to understand the whole issue. Okay, so the projects actually end up with quite what we call a failure, because the difficulty to understand all the CPA reports to really figure out the nature of the issue, whether they benefit, whether they hurt the community, is difficult to measure. Okay. So the project failed because they end up with additional expense of almost $10 million to actually go to an alternative route. Okay, and this is a kind of example of failed participation. So to develop methods to address that, basically what we did is to look at the decision-making process in local government. And we find out typically in a community where there's a policy issue coming up, typically what we see is that the decision maker is waiting for some of the kind of public feedback or input to that process. Okay. However, majority of the people are not going to have time to attend that issue, so we end up with a small number of people actually looking into the issue very deeply and then report their findings to the broader public. Okay, so what you see is that we assume there's the mini public, the representative of the general public, and then we have this broader community citizens that form their opinions after we have figured out all these details. Okay? So the key challenge here is that we need to have a way to identify all the policy alternatives and then also identify these consequences, okay? And that is challenging due to the nature of the issue, due to the complexity of the judgment. Okay? So one of the work we did in the last few years is to develop what we call a knowledge crystallization process, where we use a small group of people, okay, from the community, and they spend quite an amount of time analyzing the issue by analyzing all these source opinions, expressions, and then be able to report back to the public, who will give their opinion to the decision maker. Okay. So in this chart, basically, we shows that the crystallization process is embedded in the decision-making process in the community. Okay, so the input is from the community expression, and output are given to the public as well as the decision maker. So the result of this process, we call a kind of issue-based knowledge crystallization, is that it's going to create a very compact and concise report, we call a citizen statement, that is easy for the public to understand, and is also giving a better picture of the issue. Okay, so we call them knowledge crystals. Okay, this is the kind of metaphor we borrowed from chemistry. They're the most valuable kind of material are extracted from raw material. So, in order to study this problem, we developed a very concrete procedure called the community issue review. Okay, to actually be used in a real community. Okay? So in the picture we see is the experiment we ran to practice this process in State College Guoray, which is a partner of the research. Okay? So the goal of the community issue review is to use the citizens panel to provide a very balanced review of a complex community issue. Okay. It involves expert, it involves kind of media, it involves the officials, okay? And the idea is to put together all these minds, okay, but interpreting the issue, the solutions from the perspectives of the citizen. So community issue review basically can be sort of as implementation of this crystallization process, where it's divided into several phases. First is presentation, is the preparation phase. So during the preparation, we basically have to identify the issue. Okay, in this case, we basically identify a property tax issue to work on. And then we need to recruit subjects, we call it participants or panelists. And in our particular practice or experiment, we try to recruit 20 participants, and we send out 300 letters of recruiting, but we end up with 15 people committed to the participation. We thought that's pretty good kind of feedback, pretty good outcome. And after the citizens panelists are recruited, basically we set up to run a 10-day process where day one people are going to meet and get to know each other, get to know the issue, and then the process. Okay, and that day one is a face-to-face meeting. Okay, but after day one, basically we train them to work online using a system called GeoDeliberator, where people can carry out all this document analysis and claim extraction and kind of statement formation online, okay, asynchronously. So the benefit is that we're going to reduce the amount of commitment people have to leave their home, leave their job, and have to commit this process. Okay. So over these 5 phases, we were able to generate majority of the statements, but there's still questions on how people agree on some of the statements. So we basically wrap it up, this whole process, by another face-to-face meeting at day 10, where people come together in one room and they're going to finalize all the statements and creating a report. So the process actually is extremely time-consuming for us to carry it out. It takes about 10 months from planning to execution and to data analysis. Okay, and we have a lot of details about this experiment that we reported in our paper, so I will not really duplicate that. However, I want to kind of discuss a number of things. Okay, first of all, we find that putting people to work in a hybrid environment, both face-to-face and online, has kind of the benefits of the good stuff from the both worlds. Okay, so face-to-face connect people emotionally, connect people with community perspective. In the same time, online deliberation allow people to work without leaving their home, leaving their job. Okay? So, and the technology we developed has evolved over years, and this is kind of example what you see on the screen is the interface when people do information nugget extraction. Okay, and here is the interface they do when they try to put together those nuggets into claims. Okay, and then after that, they're going to generate statement from claims where they're going to really address the questions that the policy makers need to answer. So the final statement is very kind of question-driven in our case because any policy have to answer a number of questions from the kind of fieldwork we discovered. Okay? So people are allowed to discuss, negotiate, and they come to agreement. Okay, but this process is very, very collaborative. Okay, and in the sense that many of the statements are constructed by 2 or 3 people. And the process itself is highly facilitated by a professional researcher or a facilitator, which is a researcher in our team. And we have studied, reported separately on how facilitation can be done. Okay? So there's a few things that we like to talk about in terms of lesson learned. There is a number of things that we find this process can be improved or can benefit from better kind of science. Okay. First of all, we need to really look into the process, how this knowledge crystallization can produce better outcome by discovering the best knowledge scheme that is used for structuring those statements. If we don't do a good job there, it's actually hard to understand. Second is that we find, this phase-based approach really provide a workable process. However, in reality, it's sometimes hard to control the transition among phases. Okay, we do find cases we have to go back to early phase and redo some of this. Okay, and the system itself has a lot of kind of issues when we give them to the citizens who has, in many cases, lack of the computer skills and lack of the ways to deal with this technology. Okay, so the last kind of difficulty is the kind of fluidity of the collaboration that the panelists have engaged with each other is very difficult. Actually, is not well understood. So we need to further research on that process. So with that, I'd like to conclude my discussion with some of the future work. Okay, we definitely have experimented a useful approach and identified some of these advances that we need to be made. Okay, and at the same time, there's a few scientific questions about knowledge crystallization that can be further kind of studied and be polished as a process. Okay? And if we hope that when we overcome those technical difficulties and research questions, this will create a huge impact in the way people engage in their community politics. So with that, I want to conclude my talk, and I'll enjoy some questions. Thank you.